here with us this morning. My name is Karen Levin. I'm Executive Director of the Baltimore Zionist District, for those of you that I don't know. This morning, we are thrilled to have with us from Israel, Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zahavi, the CEO and founder of Alma, a nonprofit and an independent research and education center specialized in Israel's security challenges on its northern border. Sarit has briefed hundreds of groups and forums ranging from US senators, congressmen, women, and politicians to senior journalists visiting VIP groups in Israel and overseas. Sarit scripts numerous positions, papers, and updates focusing on Lebanon, Syria, and Israel's national security challenges. She served for 15 years in Israel's defense forces, specializing in military intelligence. Sarit holds an MA in Middle East Studies from Ben-Gurion University. Sarit and her husband Yaron are raising their 5 children in the Western Galilee. Sarit, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you now to begin today's program and tour.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm really excited to be with you today. I'm going to try something new today because we want to have some videos and images in a different way than the way I used to do it in the past. So I would love if everybody would be patient with me, because we're trying to do it with virtual background with Zoom, and I hope it will work out. So I'm extremely excited with everything that we're doing. And I hope it will work out. So I want to take you first and foremost to a beautiful place in the Golan, which the name of the place is Mount Bental. Mount Bental is one of the most beautiful places in the region. It's one of the most tourist places in the region. And 1 minute, I need to take a breath because I can't find the photo, but in a minute it will work out. Okay, that's the image. This is it. So Mount Bental is a beautiful place because until COVID-19, almost every tourist group that came to Israel used to come to Mount Bental and take a look at Syria, take a look at the border. It's less than a mile from the border. It's a high place looking at Syria. You can see the view behind me. And the reason that it's so important to start from this place, because that way you can understand past, present, and future of what's going on the borderline. Today, we will try to take you to a virtual tour along the borderline between Israel and Syria and Lebanon, and try to see how all of that is coming together to the wider picture of the geopolitical situation on our northern border. I myself speaking to you from my office, which is about 7 miles from the border. Alma Center is located about 7 miles from the border, from the Lebanese border, very close. And here in Israel is now a night, and I'm speaking to you in a situation that we are experiencing in the past few months of a kind of alertness and tension along Israel's northern border. And I want, to have a mixture of visuals that will enable you to understand what we are experiencing here on our daily life, who are the players on the other side of the border, and why does that matter for us when we speak about security? That's the tactical level, our everyday life. And on the other hand, how does that matter when we speak about, the wider picture, the strategic picture, the fact that there is a change of administration in the US, etc. So first, I would want to start with what happened recently in Iran, in Tehran. I'm going far away now, hundreds of miles from Israel. You probably heard in the news that Fakhrizadeh, which is a senior professor in Iran, but he's not just a professor. He is the head of the nuclear military program in Iran. And he was assassinated about 10 days ago with really a brutal assassination against his vehicle. Shots were fired, and immediately the Iranians attributed this assassination to Israel and promised revenge. And you know, when the Iranians, all Hezbollah, promised revenge, here on the northern border, immediately we start to hear movements. We start to understand that things are happening because everybody takes these threats very seriously. And you know, all options are all on the table. It's not only retaliation on the borderline. It could be with cyber attack. It could be outside of Israel, like Iran did in the 90s against Israeli presence or even Jewish presence outside of Israel. It could be using proxies such as Hamas, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, or proxies from Syria. We don't know exactly how the Iranians would choose to retaliate, and we also don't know exactly how the Iranians, when the Iranians would choose to retaliate, whether it would be immediately, which we assess no, or they would wait until the change of government administration in the United States to see what's happening with the Biden administration, but they will retaliate. And I think that's my main message when we consider this assassination in Tehran, when we speak about it. And that's why it was so important for me to talk a little bit about what's going on our borders, because it is clear that any retaliation, no matter where it's going to be, any retaliation that will succeed from the Iranian point of view and that will cause damage to Israel may take us into escalation that will affect our daily lives over here on the border. So I want to take you for a moment to the reality that we are living in the past few months, even before the assassination against Fakhrizadeh. We were in a situation, as I've said, of alertness. I myself was kind of afraid to go to the borderline. Now, it's funny to say that because I visited the borderline almost every day in the past years since I opened the Alma. I'm talking about the borderline with Syria or with Lebanon, doesn't matter. And I'll show you some photos of how the borderline looks like. This is how it looks like behind me, one of the places along the border. This is the area that you're looking at now is one of these areas that I avoid going to these days because a few months ago in August, there was a killing of Hezbollah operative in Syria, something that doesn't happen too often. And again, immediately Hezbollah attributed this assassination, it's not assassination, it was a killing, an operation, to Israel and promised revenge. And since then, few times, there were tries of Hezbollah to revenge. Now you can see in the share screen one of these tries. These are IEDs, what you see in the photo. IEDs that were planted on the Syrian border, meaning that there is presence of Hezbollah on the Syrian border. Luckily enough, IDF found these IEDs before anybody got hurt. But this is one of the tries of the Hezbollah to attack IDF soldiers, to kill IDF soldiers in a way that would be the retaliation. Another try was this. I wanted to take a look at this video. This is a video that was published by the IDF. A squad of about 4 terrorists were approaching the border. That's the fence. They are inside Israeli territory now, since they are Israeli territories which are east to the border. That's the Syrian border. Planting a bag with some mines inside and going, getting out of the area. IDF was following them and then killed them. Managed to kill them and actually prevent any damage or any killing of IDF soldiers. These are 2 incidents out of about 4 that we were facing in the past time. And that's why for me to travel along the border, the area that you're looking at now, which is, as you can see, an area which is a little bit forested, low, meaning that Hezbollah can take a look from above And I didn't feel secure enough to go there because Hezbollah identified me as part of military, though Alma Center, the center that I have founded, is completely independent. In the point of view of the Iranians, in the point of view of Hezbollah, we are a research center that belongs to the Zionist entity. And it's important to mention that because, you know, just in the past few months, we experienced few cyber attacks against Alma. When the Iranians, and we made some research with cyber security company that is helping us, and we have found out that the Iranians themselves were stealing reports, research reports from another or from other research or think tanks, either in Israel or outside of Israel, sending them to us and asking us to give our point of view. And we sent our point of view, our notes about these documents, and actually we sent our notes to the Iranians themselves. So you see that the battlefield between Israel and Iran is not only on the northern border, and it's not only, you know, in Syria. In a minute, I will relate to what is happening in Syria. It's also in the cybernetic campaign, if I may call it this way. So what is actually happening in Syria? In the past few years, the civil war in Syria is coming to its end. And actually what we see a situation that, I want to go back to the Syrian border now. We see a situation that the Iranians are taking over more and more areas of influence in Syria. I'm not even saying control because it's not like occupying, it's a little bit different. They are building militias, Shiite militias that are composed either from Syrians or from others that are being brought from outside of Syria into Syria, and that way creating more and more influence. Also, they are putting a lot of efforts in civilian infrastructure, whether in demographic, whether in building religious institutions or education or social services, all of that in order to create more and more influence inside Syria, and of course, more and more influence next to the border with Israel, which over there, they are also building a Hezbollah presence, which in a minute I will relate to. What does that mean from when we speak about the Israeli strategy? Israeli strategy had to be changed completely in the past few years, few times, more than once. What does that mean? Look, I don't know if you know, but the main or most interesting TV show in Israel now, we had the last chapter yesterday, is Shat Ne'ilah, the same name of the prayer that closed Yom Kippur Day, because it's about the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Yom Kippur War in 1973, and you can see exactly the views of where these battles were taken in 1973. Completely changed our point of view about how to defend ourselves, because we felt that we were on the edge of losing the state of Israel. Our surviveness was at stake. And since this was a situation in 1973, after 1973, Israel made a lot of measures along the borderline to make sure that we are not going to end up in the same situation again. The area that you see behind me, part of it is a minefield. Many minefields were planted next to the Israeli-Syrian border in order to stop Syrian tanks from invading again. Some of these areas, you can see anti-tank trenches to stop the tanks from coming. There is a UN presence right behind me. You may notice a UN post, UN presence over there as well, which is supposed to create a demilitarized zone between Israel and Syria, and inspection to make sure that we are not bringing too many missiles or tanks and soldiers, and the other side as well. None of that is relevant today. After almost a decade of a civil war in Syria, none of that is relevant today, and we had to change our strategy a few times. At first, we had a civil war on our borders. We could see in the areas that you see behind me, we could see the flames, we could see the smoke, we could see what is actually happening in the civil war. When I used to stand with groups on the borderline, I could hear the explosions of the civil war on the other side. And all of that ended 2 years ago. And today, we actually have Hezbollah on our border, and I want to show you how it looks like. That's the borderline between, can you see my clicker, Adi? Okay, so that's the borderline between Israel and Syria. I wanted to say Israel and Hezbollah, but actually it's Israel and Syria. Here you can see exactly where the two recent incidents where you could see the video and the photo taking place. And all these yellow signs are actually yellow signs of Hezbollah presence in the Syrian side of the border of 2 units. One unit looks like this, is what we call the Golan File. It's a unit that is composed of mainly Syrians that are living in the area, and they are trained, are being paid to plan, and when they get the order, to carry out terrorist attacks against Israel, like those you could see in my photos and video that IDF published. The second unit, which looks like this, it's the Southern Command Unit. And the Southern Command Unit means that they are there in order to train the Syrian army to be capable of one day attacking Israel, building the operational infrastructure to prepare the Syrian army to one day attack Israel. This is unheard of. It's a terrorist group from Lebanon that is actually training the sovereign army inside Syria, meaning that in each of these is actually, or most of these are also bases of the Syrians themselves. And you see Lebanese Hezbollah commander, which is training the Syrian army commander. As weird as it sounds, that's the situation that was created in the past 2 years in the Syrian Golan. What does Israel do in order to face this very interesting situation? So the strategy today is what the Israelis call Mabam. It's in Hebrew, of course, Rashi Tevot, I forgot the word in English, but
initials.
Initials, thank you. Initials, which the idea is the campaign between the wars, or the war between the wars. And the idea is to carry out attacks against Iranian presence in Syria, mainly Iranian presence in Syria, but without claiming any responsibility. And that way, you know, carry out attacks, trying to stop the Iranian taking over of Syria, but also creating kind of ambiguity that will enable us not to escalate the situation. Of course, there is risks in this, a lot of risk. What if they would decide to retaliate? And I've said mainly Iranian presence in Syria because Israel is very careful from killing Hezbollah operatives in Syria, because Hezbollah promised that killing of Hezbollah operatives in Syria would mean escalation, would mean retaliation. And as I've said, this is actually the situation that we are in now, because there was a killing and it's kind of an open tag between Israel and Hezbollah. Why in Syria? Why not in Lebanon? And we will discuss Lebanon in a minute in details. Why in Syria? Why not in Lebanon? Because in Lebanon, most of Hezbollah infrastructure is based in civilian infrastructure, while in Syria, it is still in military bases in a way that enable us to attack it. If the situation in 10 years from now will be the same as it is in Lebanon, it will be much more difficult to carry out this Mabam, this campaign between the wars, because we will endanger civilians. And that's why you see this campaign between the wars mainly in Syria. In recent years, Israel had carried out more than 1,000 targets were attacked in Syria by Israel in many occasions, and Israel claimed responsibility to very few of these. And not a single civilian got killed in these attacks. And that's very important to emphasize, because the idea is not to create escalation and not to take us into war. And of course, we don't want to kill any civilians. And it's easier because it's not hidden inside the homes. I want to send you the link to the full report of Hezbollah in Syria. And I'm doing this. I hope I would succeed in doing this in the chat. Let's see if I will. Okay. Karen, you're invited to send it to everybody. It was a direct message to you. So I've shown you Hezbollah in Syria. I explained the situation on the Syrian border, but you know, as I've said, I actually live next to the Lebanese border. I actually live about 7 miles from the Syrian Lebanese border. My Alma Center is next to where I live. This would mean, by the way, that we have 9 seconds to run for shelter. My kids knows that, but I'm trying not to talk about that too much with them, but they know that whenever they hear the sirens, they need to run for shelter very quickly. Me and my husband, we raised 5 kids today together in the Galilee. One of them is already a soldier, but you can understand how troubling it is when you know that you only have 9 seconds to run for shelter while the shelter is downstairs and the bedrooms are upstairs. Why would we run for shelter? What's exactly the capabilities of Hezbollah? And why am I so worried about Hezbollah? I want to focus on Lebanon, but in order to do that, I want to start from a map. I'm a former intelligence officer, I'm sorry, and we like maps. So I want to start from this map. And this is a map of the northern border. We discussed, this is where I am. Can you see my clicker, Adi? Okay, so this is where I am. That's the border with Lebanon, and this is the border with Syria. And we are about 34 miles from the border with Syria, but only 7 miles from the border with Lebanon. But the reason I'm showing you this map, it's not the border. The reason I'm showing you this map is because of these colors. I don't know if you can see, but our map is really colorful. And these colors are actually expressing the different religious sects in the region. The Syrian side is mostly Sunni. Going back to 2 more wars in Syria, that's why it's so difficult for the Iranians to hide the ammunition inside civilian infrastructure. And that's why they are putting a lot of efforts to create more influence in the civilian aspect. While in Lebanon, this has already happened, and the population in Lebanon, in South Lebanon, in the areas that are bordering Israel, are actually Shiite, the same as Iran, the same as Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is actually hiding its ammunition inside these Shiite villages in South Lebanon. By the way, if you look at Israel, which is the Jewish state, or the state of the Jewish people, you can see that it's really colorful, and we've got everybody here in the Galilee. And the funny thing is that in Israel, we live in peace. Over here in the Galilee, Jews and Arabs live in peace. Here in Alma Center, we have employees from various sects, and we are good friends, various political opinions, various backgrounds, various religious sects, and we live in peace. My kids are going to school with Arab kids, Druze kids, Arab, Muslim, Christians, whatever, and we are friends. And I, you know, my favorite bakery is next to the mosque in Tarshiha, which is 5 minutes walk from my home. So I think that's, I would love if everywhere in the Middle East, the situation would be like it is in my neighborhood where I live. But going back to Hezbollah in Lebanon, the issue of the sects and the demography is highly important when we speak about Lebanon. Because in Lebanon, religious sects are dictating political situation. And in Lebanon, the prime minister will always be Sunni. The head of the parliament will always be Shiite. The president will always be Christian. The parliament always be divided, half Christians, half Sunnis, half Christians, half Muslims. And it's a political key. It's a sectarial political key. Now, of course, it's influenced the way Lebanon works because as long as Hezbollah is getting more and more power, it means that the Shiite sect is getting more and more power, and the others are more frustrated. Eventually, when we speak about a year ago, it got to, the point that the Lebanese went out to the street with protests and demanded everybody to resign. The government had resigned, tons of instability, terrible, terrible economic situation. And, the peak was this incident last August when there was a huge explosion in the seaport of Beirut that actually destroyed more than half of the city. 300,000 people lost their homes. The seaport was completely destroyed. You can see how it looks like now. And, these were people that were already in a very difficult economic situation. So imagine how it is today. About 200 people lost their lives. Thousands were injured. The damage is unbelievable. And all of that with a political crisis as well. Lebanese demanded everybody, all our leadership out. We want to exchange all the leadership. But of course, the main question is, who will replace them? And they went out to the street, and you see that Lebanese understand that it's Iran that is actually causing all these troubles in Lebanon. Because as long as you have Hezbollah that is supported and directed and working for the Iranians, you will never see a future for Lebanon. Hezbollah is not only a political party and not only a social movement with a huge social infrastructure inside the villages of Lebanon and the towns and cities, but it is also a militia, a very strong militia, a militia that actually is stronger than the Lebanese army. A militia that, in opposed to the Lebanese army, is not getting the orders from the president of Lebanon. It is getting the orders from the Iranian boss. And that's why it's such a huge problem. Now, I want to connect the dots. I want to connect what is happening inside Lebanon to what is happening with our security, because of course it affects that. What is Hezbollah's mission? Hezbollah's mission is to spread the Islamic revolution, is to spread the radical Shiite ideology of Iran. Part of that is the fight against Israel, is destroying the state of Israel. Of course, Hezbollah knows exactly as I know, as you know, that it is not a plan that will be executed tomorrow morning. But Hezbollah is doing everything it can in order to be prepared. And you know what? I'm jumping here, but I don't care. I want to say this now. The scenario that worries me the most is the scenario of what we call in Israel drops or light rain. You know what does that mean? I don't mean water. I mean missiles. The scenario that troubles me the most, not as an expert, but as a mother, is a scenario that we will experience a situation here the same as the people in the southern part of Israel are experiencing in the past 20 years. Meaning that every 2 weeks, every day, every few weeks, rockets will be launched towards Israel, and sirens will be on, and our children will grow up in a completely different atmosphere than they are experiencing today. This is what worries me the most. And I think this is the most probable scenario when we think about escalation. The problem is that it never stops there. And after this kind of escalation, you may get to war. You may get to something which is much more brutal and violent. It is limited in time, but it can cause tons of damage. I will try to put something on my background now. Let's see if I will succeed. What I'm putting now is something that was published today. today by Hezbollah. What is this? It's a video that Hezbollah made about the next war with Israel. Propaganda. I'm not denying. This is propaganda. This is pure Hezbollah propaganda. By the way, it is not meant for us. It's in Arabic. It is not meant for you. It is meant for the Lebanese. Show them how relevant and vital and strong is Hezbollah, fighting Israel, defending Lebanon, etc. Why am I showing you propaganda? Because this propaganda specifically is based on an Israeli research. And Hezbollah used an Israeli research of one of the biggest think tanks for security in Israel, the INSS, that was published yesterday. And actually created a video based on the research. And the topic of the research was how the next war between Israel and Hezbollah would look like. And actually what it is saying that the home front is going to be the one that would be damaged most, because we are going to have thousands of rockets that will be launched at Israel at the same time and during the war. It says that we are going to face one front from the sea all the way to the Golan, because this is the capabilities of Hezbollah today. It is saying that Hezbollah today have thousands, more than 100,000 rockets that are stored in Lebanon in these kind of warehouses that you could see behind me, or in the towns, in the villages of South Lebanon, the same villages that we can see just on the other side of the border. Let's show you the other side of the border. I must show you for a moment how the other side of the border look like. Let's see if I can do that quickly enough. Yes, I can. Okay, so you know what? I will do it with share screen. I must show you how the other side of the border looks like. Can you see the video? No. Why can't you see the video?
I think you need to start the video and then share the video and not the folder. You share the folder and not the video itself.
Okay, I will try it again. It's not there. Let's do it in a different way. Can you see it now? Welcome to Zarit. Zarit is a small community next to the border. You can see a mushroom factory to the left, and everything else is actually Lebanon. These are buildings from Lebanon. You can see the fence just below us over there. All these trees are in Lebanon. Everything is so close. The communities are so close. I took this video myself from inside Zarit. You can see that the village in Lebanon where the rockets are stored is actually in a controlling area. It is higher than the Israeli side, and that's why it's so easy for Hezbollah to intimidate the people of Zarit that are living there. And that's why, for me, it was important. I want to stop it for a moment. That's why, for me, it was important to show you how close everything is. how close everything is, and how actually you can almost, don't have time. You don't have time to secure the communities. You don't have time to run for shelter. You don't have time to call the army, the IDF squad to come and defend the citizens if anybody will try to get in. So I'm just, want to do an interim summary before I continue. Interim summary would mean that Hezbollah is holding about 100,000 rockets in Lebanon in general. About half of them are stored in South Lebanon, in the areas that you could see in my map. Inside the towns, inside the villages, below the homes, beneath the mosques and the schools. And that's why it's so difficult to attack them as part of the war, the campaign between the war. And of course, it will also be difficult to attack them in war. The risk of collateral damage is really big. On top of that, in the past few years, Hezbollah was very busy in making these rockets accurate. We call it the Precision Guided Missiles Project. And IDF was very busy in trying to stop this project. As long as this project is in Syria, as I've said, it's easy, part of the Mabam, part of the campaign between the war. And then Hezbollah tried to move the project to Lebanon. What do you do then? And then actually what happened is that Hezbollah moved it to Lebanon, IDF exposed it. Instead of attacking it, IDF exposed it, published the warehouses, published the factories where they are, show the pictures in the UN, publish it all over the media, and actually force Hezbollah to evacuate the factories. Of course, none of us know whether it was enough, whether IDF exposed all the factories, whether Hezbollah is trying to build more. The assessments are that Hezbollah is already holding at least tens of accurate rockets. What does that mean for Israelis? It means that Iron Dome, should I explain what Iron Dome is? It's, okay. So it means that Iron Dome can't miss, not a single rocket, because every miss of Iron Dome would be a catastrophe. Now, sometimes Iron Dome miss. It's 95%, 97%, and if Hezbollah launch many rockets at the same time, it's a little bit more difficult. But I don't know if you noticed, I also mentioned ground crossing into Israel. I've shown you Zarit, I've shown you how close everything is. Why did I mention ground crossing into Israel if the rockets are that dangerous? Because Hezbollah in the years in Syria went through a very important change. It went through a change from a terrorist group. If you ask my husband that was in the army in the 80s, he would say, we learned Hezbollah, just a few hundreds of combatants, not very professionals. We can deal with that. Okay. Hezbollah today is a well-equipped army, no tanks, no F-16, no F-35s, but commando units. Commando units that are experienced in the battlefield in Syria, that are experienced maneuvering brigades from one place to another, taking over a town, entering, invading, but again, with commando units into places, holding places, and using methods of Russian army, and as I've said, Syrian army, and then giving it back to the Syrian army afterwards, the knowledge, giving back the knowledge. How all of that was being brought to the Lebanese border, I want to show you another video. Let's see if I can share screen. Can you see it? So we are again on the border, which is on our left, and you can see some white pipes over there stuck in the ground like needles. These white pipes, and you can see the border ahead, these white pipes are all the tries of the IDF to find Hezbollah border crossing tunnels below the ground. And I took a video, I took the camera to the right side so you could see how it looks like on the right side, how Israel looks like. You can see that the communities are very close. About 5 minutes running, you find yourself in Zarit or in Shtula, and the fence ahead of us is where the tunnel was found. You're probably very curious to see the tunnel now, right? So let's take a look at the tunnel and see how it looks like from inside. Welcome to Hezbollah border crossing tunnel. These stairs were made by Hezbollah. All these wires here were put by Hezbollah. All these glitches that you can see on the walls are actually the signs of the drillings in the tunnel. This white pipe is the IDF, bingo, the one that actually found the tunnel, the same one that you could see from above the ground. This pipe is air conditioned that was put by Hezbollah. The lights were put by Hezbollah. IDF found this tunnel well equipped and operational, except for the exit. The exit was built by the IDF, but the opening is inside Lebanon, in a town just on the other side of the border, of course, a Shiite town. The tunnel that you could see here is the longest Hezbollah tunnel. It's about a mile long, half a mile long. It's about 22 stories deep, 150 feet, I'm calculating for meters, 150 feet deep below the ground. Now, I don't know if any of you visited the tunnels of Hamas in Gaza. This is different because in Hamas, the terrain is flat and it's really easy to dig because it's all sand. And it's really needed because it's flat. We can see anywhere from the watching tower along the borderline. In Lebanon, most of the borderline is forested and hills and valleys, and there are tons of places to hide along the borderline between Israel and Lebanon. Why would they need tunnels? They would only need tunnels if they want to enter in Israel with hundreds of combatants, which this is a little bit more difficult to hide. Hundreds of combatants could enter easily, covertly, inside these tunnels, cross into Israel. All in all, 6 tunnels were found. 6 tunnels were found in South Lebanon, in few areas along the borderline, very close to communities or very close to communities and to a road that can actually isolate the community. So of course the question should be now, okay, so IDF found the tunnels, what's the problem? IDF found the tunnels, what's the problem? You don't know what you don't know. I'm saying that as an intelligence officer. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know how many of them are there more. My understanding is that there are no more tunnels, as IDF declared, there are no more tunnels that are border crossing, but there may be more tunnels that can bring the Hezbollah combatants very close to the border. To carry out this project of tunnels, when we found that, taught us not only about the specific capability of running inside a tunnel. It taught us how much resources, money, and time Hezbollah and Iran was willing to invest in order to kill Israelis. And I think this is the key to understand what is actually happening over here. When I entered the tunnel with groups last winter, trying to calculate with the COVID-19, one of the women in one of the groups, we entered, you enter, you go down all these stairs. We didn't go down all the 22 stories, just about 8 stories. And suddenly one of the ladies couldn't breathe and we took her out very quickly. And I asked her, are you okay? What happened to you? And she said, I couldn't breathe. The air was full of hate. And she got it. She actually got it. Because it's not about tunnels. Okay, we found the tunnels. It's about how deep is the hate. And the hate is as deep as the tunnels. And I think that's the main problem. We have good intelligence. We can find where the rockets are. We have a very motivated army. We will survive. We survived in 73. We will survive in the next war. But how deep is the hate? And I think this was the most astonishing thing for me, because it took them about 1 meter per day to excavate this complicated rocky soil soil of the area of the Lebanese border. You know, I want to open this for questions, right, Adi? I see that there are already a few questions. So before I do that, I want to show you last video, which was taken, you wouldn't believe, but only 5 minutes from the tunnel. 5 minutes drive from the tunnel, next to a community named Shtula. There is a beautiful touristic place where the residents of Shtula, you can see the screen? Now you can't. Now you can. Where the residents of Shtula decided to paint on the wall. Now, I don't want to mislead you guys. This is not a wall. These are barricades. This is the small wall. IDF started to build a wall between the Israeli and the Lebanese border, about 13 kilometers out of 113 kilometers, and excuse me for not calculating in miles now, was already walled. All the rest is still fenced, with not a very impressive fence, by the way. And this very small part is the first area where IDF put some barricades in order to prevent anybody from getting in, understanding that this may happen, and to prevent anybody from not only getting in, but also, oh, let's stop here. It's a nice sentence. But also snipers to shoot or anything. Why? Because this place is positioned next to the entrance to Shtula, next to the entrance to the community. And just on the other side, as you can see, the yellow gate, that's the border between Israel and Lebanon. This became a touristic place. I took my children over there. I took my little Alma, which I named the organization after her, to this place. And we always have hope. And I also took my staff to this place. And I don't know if, I'm not sure I can translate the sentence. Karen, can you help me translate this beautiful biblical sentence on the wall?
Yeah, just read it. I mean, read it.
Can you read it? וכידתו חרבותם לעתים וחניתותיהם למזמרות, לא יישא גוי אל גוי חרב ולא ילמדו עוד מלחמה.
That's very biblical.
Okay, so I would try.
Read it slower, the first two words.
I will try. The idea is that we would put our weapons aside, we will put our swords aside, we put them down, and we will make them just regular agriculture tools, and we will stop teaching the art of war. We'll just teach peace. So I think we can stop here with this hope, because there is always hope. We are Israelis, we must have hope. And let's see if you have questions now. I would appreciate if anybody can moderate the questions for me.
Yeah, I'll moderate the questions. I just wanted to add, when you were talking about the tunnels, that actually about a year and a half ago, 2 years, I don't remember. Sorry. Adi, do you want to moderate the questions, Adi, for a second?
Okay, let me just spotlight myself instead. Let's see, the chat is full, so let me go back and see what people wrote. Okay, Karen is back. Karen, do you want to do it?
Okay, so, yes. Are Sunni Arab countries doing anything of substance to remain Hezbollah? To remand Hezbollah, I think it says.
I'm sorry, again?
Are Sunni Arab countries doing anything to remand Hezbollah?
Look, when we speak about this Shiite-Sunni conflict, it's not fair. It's not a fair fight. Because the Sunni states are divided, or there is no Sunni bloc, there is no Sunni axis, but there is Shiite axis. The collaboration between the Shiite players is much stronger and deeper than the collaboration between the Sunni camp. It's not even a camp. Having said that, of course, the Abraham Accords were made in this timing because of the rising power of Iran, because the Emirates are sharing with Israel the same fear and the same worries from the Iranian getting stronger and getting more influence in the Middle East in the past few years. Are they going to fight Hezbollah? They designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. If Hezbollah would operate on their own territory, of course, Bahrain is a good example. I don't see them bombing Hezbollah assets in Lebanon or in Syria when we will have war with Hezbollah.
So we know about terrible impacts of ISIS on Syria and Iraq. What about in Lebanon? It's talking about ISIS.
The good news is that ISIS is not what it used to be in 2014, neither in Syria nor in Lebanon. ISIS is not taking any land in Syria anymore. There are ISIS cells that are still operational in Syria, by the way, attacking the Shiites. But they are not as dangerous as they used to be. Yes, there is ISIS presence in Lebanon. They are fighting Hezbollah here and there. Don't expect them to solve our problems.
Why have tunnels not been destroyed?
Oh, first, so we will be able to show you the tunnels. But much more than that, destroying the tunnels, two tunnels were destroyed. One of them was blocked with cement completely, meaning that nobody can cross. The other was exploded. And when it was exploded, it caused damage to the roads and areas, and IDF decided that it's too risky, it may kill people on the other side, etc., and decided to block them. So the tunnel that you see, that you saw in my video today, is half blocked. You cannot cross into Lebanon from this tunnel, and Lebanese cannot cross into Israel from this tunnel. But some of it was preserved, by the way, for research as well, but also to be capable of showing it to people outside of Israel.
In case of a real war, how should Israel balance the collateral damage in Lebanon versus the lives of Israeli citizens? Do Israel leaders have an answer to this question? I don't know if that's...
This is the not $1 billion question, that's the $10 million question, I know, $1 billion question. No, there is no way to balance. There is only tactical decisions of the commanders at the zone, whether it's the head of the Northern Command. Maybe I should begin this answer completely differently, and I would do it this way. In the Alma Center, we decided that we want people to experience the exactly same dilemma between collateral damage and the security of Israelis. And we have built a simulation over here that people are becoming the Israeli cabinet. They are divided to the Israeli ministries, and they have to face the same dilemma. They need to make decisions. Well, now I will tell you a small secret. In most cases, Israeli cabinet do not make decisions whether to attack a target in Lebanon during the war. It's the decision for the military commanders, which are, by the way, operating under strict legal adviseness. But the idea of our simulation was to make people like you meet our dilemma. And it is a dilemma, and that's why it's not an escape room. There is no right or wrong answer. And in each case of a risk for collateral damage, it will be observed, and the decision will be accepted or will be taken for this specific case. And each case is different. So we don't have like an equation or a formula of how to deal with this problem. But we do put a lot of efforts to warn the population and to try to prevent collateral damage, and to try to make people, to call them to leave the areas of conflict and the areas of war, but we can't be positive that they had done so during war.
Is the United States aware of the tunnels that Iran has constructed by Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Definitely. This was presented to the UN. I think representative of almost all the states in the world that have connections with Israel visited these tunnels or received information about it.
Okay.
I myself hosted some groups over there of
Leaders.
politicians from Germany, from United States, from France.
Has anyone asked the United States why they are still funding the Lebanese army when the Lebanese army is indistinguishable from the Hezbollah fighters?
Wow, that's a very good question. First, we have a report about that, not about why the United States continue to fund, but what exactly the relationship between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah. I will put it this way. Look, if the United States will not help the Lebanese army, somebody will. I'm saying this as an Israeli, I don't want this somebody to be Iran or Russia. I prefer it with the United States. But I think that you could do better in the sense of conditioning the assistance, supervision of the assistance, and even making this assistance a tool to put some more pressure on the Lebanese government to push Hezbollah aside, which is very difficult, by the way. It is becoming more and more difficult every day.
I think I have two more questions and then we'll end it. And just as a note, if you want to look in the chat, Harriet put the translation of the quote that we had up on the screen. So the translation is on there. So thank you for that, Harriet. Sheer numbers, can't the number of Hezbollah rockets overwhelm the Iron Dome?
Yes. As I've said, I just sent you the link to our website. You're invited to subscribe and get in. Yes, Iron Dome has limit. By the way, each missile of Iron Dome costs $50,000. Each missile. Okay, so if Hezbollah would launch hundreds of missiles at the same time, it's a problem. If Hezbollah would launch hundreds of missiles at the same time to various places in Israel, and at the same time Hamas would also launch some rockets, it's a problem. Again, we will survive, we will prevail, but always the question is what the price would be.
This is the last question that we'll take. Is Hezbollah finding it more difficult to recruit soldiers? Calvin says he read that these young men do not want to fight and die in Syria, etc.
Look, there were reports about that during the time that we had funerals of Hezbollah combatants, that there is a protest. But I must tell you that the bottom line, Hezbollah military capability was not damaged by a protest here and there, by difficulties here and there, or economic difficulties or whatever.
Great. So I think that's it. Thank you so much. We can